In this chapter, we'll take a look at a very powerful component in the Kendo UI library called Chart. This highly configurable and dynamic component makes data visualization a snap, but because it is so powerful, there are many features and configuration options to consider. We'll start off by taking a look at the anatomy of a Kendo chart. Then we'll dive right in and add a chart to the RPS dashboard as per the new requirements for visualization. We'll configure the chart from its simplest form to more complex dynamic configuration options with inline components and directives. The Kendo chart is highly configurable and highly customizable. While all the configuration options are available on the Docs website, let's take a look at some of the major ones now, and then the ones we'll be using in our project. When you go to the Components documentation, under Charts, here you'll see the different types of charts available in this package. You've got area charts, bar charts, box plot, bullet, line, and there's even more. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of visualizations available in this package. In this chapter, we're going to be using the bar chart. By the way, the bar chart can render either horizontally or vertically. When it's vertical rendering, it's called a column chart. This is what we're actually going after on our dashboard page. Now, the chart itself has many different parts. The base element is the Kendo chart itself. If we take a look at the source code in this particular example, you'll see that that's the root element. Inside the root element, you'll have the ability to add inner elements that control different aspects of the chart. In this example, we have chart series and then chart series item. If we take a look at this previous example, the chart sub-elements are chart title, category axis, and series as well. The title element will allow you to bind the title of the chart. You can control the axes, how they're presented, and what type of data they present. And a very important element is the series. This is the part that actually controls the data itself. And series can represent the data in many different ways. For example, in this bar chart, we've added a series of type bar, but if we take a look at this other example, in here the series is of type column. Let's take a look at some of these other types of charts while we're here. This is an example of what a bubble chart looks like, and the series is of type bubble. Another popular one is line charts. Here's an example of that, where the series is of type line. Think of series as the actual array of data that you're going to be plotting along the X and Y axes. And there can be multiple series on each chart, as seen in this example. So here we have a red series, a yellow series, and a green series, whatever they may represent. Perhaps these are units of bicycles sold in each of the months at a bike shop. Each of the series items can define the data, the type, the graphical representation, such as color, spacing, and other properties. We'll get into more of that later on in this chapter. Now here in this example, you'll also see months listed on the x-axis. These are the chart categories. Categories could be anything. However, if categories are detected to be date objects, those are treated specially by the Kendo chart, and dates are arranged chronologically and automatically. And this is exactly what we'll be doing in this chapter. So you'll see a good example of this. And that's a brief introduction to the anatomy of a chart. It's better to learn by doing, of course, so let's add a chart to our RPS application and implement it. Let's move on to getting the chart module installed and add it to our application. This is the current state of our application. On the dashboard page, we're showing the active issues section right now with some counts. And down here in the all issues section, this is where we want to add our chart. Here's the completed application, again for your reference. The active issues section is still the same, but down here we have a new chart now. And all these filters up here, all the buttons and the assignee dropdown act on the active issues section as well as on the chart. This happens simultaneously, so all the data is kept up to date based on the filters. So this is what we want to implement. Let's have a look at the code. Open up your dashboard page. It's in the Views folder. And right over here is our H3 tag that says All Issues. This is where we want to add our chart. I'm going to add a span here just so that we are aware of where this is when it gets rendered out. This is just temporary. But let's have a look at what this looks like now. So here is where we want to place our chart. All right, let's head over to the documentation, and in the Charts section under Overview, let's find the installation steps. Here's the npm command to install a few packages. Notice that while we already have these two installed, licensing and Intel package, we don't have the drawing one installed yet, or the charts package. So I'm going to just copy this entire command, and back on my command line, I'm going to terminate the process that's running our application right now. so I can run my installation command. And there we go. I've installed the packages. Now I'm going to run npm run serve again to start up my dev server. Okay, let's take a look at the code. And I'm just going to take a quick peek at package.json to make sure everything was installed. Kendo drawing is there, as well as Kendo view charts. Good. Now I want to start this out simple, just so that you can see how we can add a basic chart to our application. And I'm going to use one of the examples in the demo here. And let's head over here to data binding. I'm going to just select a very basic chart here. On this example right here, we're going to view source. And I'm going to copy this chart right here in the template to our code. So instead of this span, I'm going to remove that and paste in our chart now. Now we still haven't imported this chart. Let's do that now. I'm going to go to our component, and right over here I'm going to say import chart, and that's coming from add progress Kendo view charts. And we need to expose chart now to our components. Previously I've mapped the component name I want to use to the component itself. You don't have to do that. You can actually just include the component you want to use, and this will work fine. And we're going to do this for the rest of the components that are children of the chart component. However, for the top level root chart component, I do want to actually name that Kendo chart, and I'm going to map that to chart. Okay, now there's another set of components that I need to import, and that's chart series and chart series item. And I need to rename the root component to Kendo chart. And let's import chart series and chart series item here from the package. These two components I'm actually just going to include in our components section, and I'm not going to do any sort of mapping for these. They're going to be named what they are, coming directly from the package. And there's one more thing we need to do. We are binding the data items here to a series data array, but that array does not exist. So what we could do is just include an array here, and I'll just include a basic array of integers right in line here, just to show you this example. So when I go to the application, you'll see that now we have a chart, and it's a pretty meaningless chart. It just shows 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But as you can see, Kendo chart automatically figures out what to show in the y-axis based on the data that's included. You can take full control of the y-axis by using another nested element of the chart, but you can also rely on Kendo chart to figure that out for you if you just need to have a very basic chart. And that's exactly what we have here, a basic chart. Now our chart needs a title. Even though we have this H3 here, I just want to show you how you can add a title to our chart as well. And we can include a chart title component here, so we can take control of the title of this chart. This chart title component will have a text attribute that we can bind, and let's add all issues text in there. We need to make sure that we import chart title from the charts package and add it to our components as well. This is something we'll do every time we use a new component from the chart package. And if we have a look at that now, you'll see that all issues is at the top of the chart. And there's a few more things you can do to control that chart title. For example, we can go up here and change the position of that title. Let's say we want it to be at the bottom of the chart for some reason. I'm not sure why you'd want that, but there it is at the bottom of the chart now. By default, the position is top, so we can keep that there. And we can also bind the align attribute. The default, of course, is center, and that's what you see here. We can also change that to left or right. Here's an example of aligning that title to the left. Now it is a bit redundant to have all issues H3 here and the title, but I'm going to keep the title in there just for your reference, even though we don't really need it. Let's get some real data in here in the next lesson. Let's take a look at the finished RPS tracker application, and specifically, let's look at the dashboard page and the chart. Now this chart represents the issues that we have in the database, and we have opened issues and we have closed issues here represented in this chart, with values for each presented as a stack for each month. Along the x-axis, you can see the dates. The Kendo chart refers to these as categories. These can really be any categories, but because we're using date objects, they're treated specially by Kendo chart. So if the categories are detected to be dates, the Kendo chart will automatically find the first date and the last date and calculate the in-between dates, so everything will be spread out evenly. A good example of this is March 2021 here, where there is no data present. However, the Kendo chart rendered that month anyway, because the months represented should be listed sequentially. The open issues, represented as red bars here, are a series, and the green bars are also a series, another series. So we're going to define 2 series items for the chart. Let's head over to the code now and set up the data that the chart is going to represent. Some of this is already set up for you. For example, right over here, the categories is going to be listed on the x-axis, and this is an array of dates. The items open by month are the open items, and this is going to be bound to the series that are going to be represented using the red bars. And the items closed by month are going to be bound to another series represented by the green bars. So I just want to make sure you know that these are chart properties. I'm going to label them as such. In this lesson, we're going to start with binding the categories, and then we'll continue with the series in the next lesson. Let's head over to our chart in the template, and we're going to declare a special component here inside the chart called chart category axis. And make sure you also add the closing tag for that, because this component can have multiple axis items defined. We're only going to define one category axis, but the Kendo chart supports multiple. I'm going to add another component here. This is going to be a self-closing component, and we're going to define some properties here. Chart category axis item. We're going to bind the categories attribute to our categories property in our component. All right, now this is not going to work yet because we need to do some imports and component declarations. So I'm going to copy this chart category axis, and let's head over to our imports. We're going to have a lot of imports from this package, so I'm going to just put them all on different lines here. And I'm going to add chart category axis and chart category axis item to our imports. And I'm going to copy both of these and add them to our components list. There we go. Now our chart still has the hard-coded series items. Let's remove that because we currently don't need that. We're going to be using real data from now on. And the next step is to actually get some categories populated into the chart. Let's go down to where we're actually loading the data and where our component is fetching the data from something called a dashboard service. This service provides convenience functions to get the status counts. Status counts is actually these numbers up here. And dashboard service also has another convenience function called get filtered issues. Now both get status counts and get filtered issues take in the filter value as the parameter, and they both return promises. However, we want to call both of these functions at the same time and only resolve our promise once both of these have returned from our API call. And the way we can do that is using a special function called promise.all. Promise.all takes in an array of the calls that you want to make. So one of the calls we want to make is the status counts call. So I'm going to copy that and paste that in here, comma, and here I'll put the other call that I've just added. That's the get filtered issues call. Now this promise all will only resolve the promise once both of those calls successfully completed. So I'm going to add a then handler here that's going to accept a result, and we're going to do something with that result. By the way, the all function does have a generic variant of it, so you can specify the types that you're expecting for strong typing, and these have to be in the order that you're making the calls. Get status counts will actually result in status counts, so we can add that, comma, and the second call for get filtered issues will result in filtered issues. Now this results object is an array where the first element is going to be the result of the first call, and the second element is going to be the result of the second call. So in other words, results sub 0 is going to be our status counts. So we can now set status counts dot value to be results sub 0, and results sub 1 is going to be our filtered issues. We no longer need these two calls down here, so I'm just going to clean that up a little bit here. And we want to do something with results sub 1, and this function is getting a little bit too full, so I'm going to create another function called update stats. This is where we're going to treat our chart data. So I'm going to pass results sub 1 to a new function called update stats. Let's create that here as a constant, and this is going to be a function that takes in all our issues, and that's going to be of type filtered issues. If we take a look at what issues all is, it has categories on it and it has items. That entire object is returned from the API. We're going to map categories over to new date objects. Let's create new client-side dates, and we're going to use the date constructor and pass in the categories that we got from the server into that constructor. And let's have a temporary variable called cats, I'm going to update our categories value with cats. So now this is what we're binding to in our chart. And if I save this, let's have a look at our chart. You will see now that we have our dates. This is now being rendered as the x-axis of the chart. So just to give you an example of this in action, I'm going to tap on 6 months, and you'll see that now the categories returned are going from June to November. And if I tap on 3 months, you'll see only 3 months as categories down here. This is all live data that's coming back from the server. So we have the basic structure of our calls down, and we're getting the categories rendered. Let's take a look at rendering the series items next. We have our data being delivered to our dashboard component from the API, and we're currently rendering the categories along the x-axis, but we're not rendering any data yet. Let's go back to the code, and this refresh function here is the function that fetches the data, and update stats is the function that's being called on the filtered issues, which contains our data for the categories as well as our data for the series. Now we just need to parse this filtered issues object called issuesAll and pull out the series data from there. Just a reminder that we are trying to fill in items open by months now and items closed by month. We've already filled the categories in the previous lesson. Okay, let's head down here to update stats, and I'm going to create 2 temporary variables for this function. I'm going to give them short names such as open, and this is going to be of type number array, and we'll initialize that to an empty array. And I'll create one for closed as well. Now let's have a look at issuesAll, and we're going to examine its items property. We're going to iterate through each one of the items there, and each one of these items is of the type items for month. So this is going to include the closed items and the open items for each month, the mapping between the categories in our series. Here's item. If we take a look at item, inside we have closed and we have open. So let's get the number of open items for each month, and we're going to push that on to our open array of numbers. And we're going to do the same thing for closed as well. And finally, we have our bindable properties that we need to fill. So this is going to be items open by month dot value is going to be equal to open, and items closed by month dot value is going to be set to closed. So now at this point, all these chart properties have been filled up. Let's go back to the template declaration, and we already have the chart series element. So let's start adding the series items in here. I'm going to add a chart series item component and bind its name property to open. Let's self-close that tag. Now, the important one here that's actually going to show us the data is called data items. You've seen this before, but now this time we're not going to hard code it here. We're going to bind it to items open by month. Now, if we take a look at our chart, we're actually getting some real data now. Here are the open items for the entirety of the year. And if we click on one of these filter buttons, you'll see that, in fact, the filtering works. Great. Let's do the same thing for our closed items. So I'm just going to copy our series item, paste it here, and just rename the name to closed, and bind the data items to items closed by month. Let's save that and have a look. Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of is working, but it's not showing us this stacked chart like it's supposed to. But that's okay, we're getting there. Now, before we get into stacking the bars, I did want to show you one more thing. And that's not something we're going to use, but I think you should know about it. And that's each chart series item can define its own type. So for example, right now by default, we're using the column type, but you can mix and match these and define, let's say, a line type and a column type. So now each one of these series is represented differently in the chart. And you can see that we have a mixed chart now of different types. Okay. That's just something you can do if you need it, but we are going to use a stacked column chart, so I'm going to remove the type because column is the default here. Now, if we want to do a stacked chart, we can bind the stack attribute and set that to true, and you only need to do that on one of the series items, and you automatically will get stacking like this. Now, chart series items will also have other attributes that you can set on them, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But the Kendo chart also provides us with a way that we can control multiple series using only one sub-element, and that's called chart series defaults. So I'm going to create a new component here, a subcomponent called chart series defaults, and it's a self-closing component. Of course, make sure that you import it and you declare that in the components section. Good. So now going back up here, what we can do is add this stack equals true to the series defaults component. And we can also control the type for all the series. Let's say we want to use the line type for all of them. Then you can just set that on the series defaults and it'll apply line type to all of the series. Okay, but we want to use columns. So I'm going to do that here and declare that explicitly. Now we're going to come back and do some more styling and add some more attributes in the next lesson to finish off the look of our chart. And that way it'll look more like the theme for our application. Now our chart is working for the most part. We have filtering working and we have data displaying, but it's not quite looking like we want it to be. We want to update the colors so that we can see that open issues are red and closed issues are green. We also want to move this legend from the right side to the bottom of the chart. And we also want the bars to be closer together. So let's head over to the code and we're going to make some updates. We'll start with the colors. Now, because we need different colors for our Kendo series items, I'm going to define the colors right on the series elements themselves. Let's bind the color attribute of the open series items to a hex value that I already have used in the application previously. It's going to be a reddish color. And I'm going to bind the color attribute of the closed items to a hex color value for the green closed items that we've seen before. And there we go. Now to bring these bars closer together, we can define a gap attribute, and we can do that right on the series defaults because that's going to apply to all the series. And a gap takes a numeric value. I'm going to declare that as 0.06. So now we have our bars closer together. Now I do also want the bars to be a little see-through to better match the final state of the application. And the way we can get that is by setting the opacity for each of the series items. So I'm going to set opacity to 0.7 on each one of these. Now unfortunately, chart series defaults doesn't have the opacity attribute. So even though we're using the same value for the opacity for each one of the series, you still have to declare that on each item. And there we go. Now we can see the lines through the bars. And finally, we want to move this legend down to the bottom of the chart instead of to the right to maximize the horizontal real estate for the chart. So we're going to declare yet another component called chart legend. And this one has a position attribute that we can set, and I'm going to set that to bottom. It's a self-closing tag, but we do need to import chart legend from our package and also declare it as a component. Let's have a look. And there we go. Now the chart stretches the fully horizontal available space and the legend is down here. Notice a little bit of interactivity there as well. Whenever you hover over one of these series in the legend, it highlights it in the chart. Speaking of interactivity, the chart does offer a lot of interactive features, and you can take a look at the documentation under chart features for the available interactive functions like panning and zooming as an example. Now if you take a look at the chart documentation and the API section, you'll see that there's a lot more things you can configure on the chart. There's quite a lot of properties here that'll let you control the look of the chart. And let's just take a look at a couple of them real quick. An example is, let's say I don't want to see the major grid lines. These are the vertical lines going up and down here in the grid. Well, we can change that. Right on the chart category access items, I can bind the attribute major grid lines and set that to false. And it'll remove those lines and just leave horizontal lines here. Now down here we do have months, but because we're dealing with date objects, we can also control the base unit that we are displaying. So let's say you don't want to display months. Well, you can change the base unit to another value. For example, let's say years. And there you go. Now we are showing 2021 and 2022. If you want to show days, it's going to get a little crowded, but you can do it. And there we go. Now we're showing every single day in the chart. So if you wanted to have your chart zoom in from months to days, for example, in your application, you could bind that value based on the window that you're looking through. So months is the default, and that's what I'm going to keep it as because that's what looks better for my particular situation here. Those are just a couple of things you can change. And as far as our requirements are concerned, our implementation of the chart is now complete. Now we have a fully functional chart with filtering, and everything is working and set up correctly. So that's Kendo Charts.